Hello, today we're going to be talking about the respiratory system. The respiratory system is a pretty amazing system that allows us to take in oxygen and then exchange it for CO2 or carbon dioxide to every cell of the body. We need that oxygen to help fuel cell respiration. And if you remember, that process occurs in the mitochondria. You can see here that as far as the respiratory system goes, we have movement that's going to enter into the nasal cavity. So the air is going to enter into the nasal cavity. It's going to then go and travel down the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, to the bronchi, into the bronchioles, into the two lungs. And we have two lungs, the right and the left lungs. We also have the diaphragm. That's the main muscle that's going to allow for respiration to occur. So again, we're going to have movement of air that goes into the nose, into the lungs. Gas exchange is going to occur between the blood and the air. And then we're going to have the gas transport in the blood through the process of the hemoglobin carrying it, and then the exchange to all of our cells in our body. If we want to just focus in on the anatomy of the respiratory system and what its actual functions are, we're going to see that it's going to have an area for gas exchange. We're moving gases into and out of surfaces. We are going to protect those respiratory surfaces. We're going to see that we have cilia, we have mucus. In our voice box, we're going to be producing sounds. And in our nasal cavity, we are going to be providing olfactory sensations to the central nervous system. You can see here we have an upper and a lower respiratory tract. You can see the upper respiratory tract consists of the nose, the nasal cavity, the sinuses, and then the pharynx. The whole purpose of the upper respiratory tract is to filter, warm, humidify the incoming air. The lower respiratory tract is the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and the alveoli. And that, again, we're going to be having the larynx is the voice box. We're going to be then transferring the oxygen to the different cells in our body in the lungs when we get into the alveolar. So, air travel. This is the conducting passageway to the lungs from the beginning of entering into our body at the nose. So it's going to pass through the nose. That's where the air is moistened, warmed, and filtered through the cilia. Remember that the nasal cavity is a hollow space between the nose, okay? It has a mucous membrane that is pseudostratified ciliated epithelium, and it has a lot of blood vessels in there. The paranasal sinuses are also lined with cilia and the mucus secreting cells. And again, the sinuses are there to reduce the weight of the skull. And it also does kind of have a resonant chamber that affects the quality of the voice. The second spot that the air is going to travel is through the pharynx. Now, the pharynx is the throat. It is going to extend from the nostrils, and it is going to be the entrance to the larynx and the esophagus. So it is a passageway for food and air. This is also going to help us produce some sounds of speech. Now, the next place it travels is through the larynx. Now, the larynx is 9 rings of cartilage that has ligaments and muscles bound to it. It is pretty much in the areas of C4 to C6, so cervical vertebrae 4 through 6. It is going to help conduct air from the trachea, and it's going to have the Adam's apple, which is cartilage. There are false vocal cords, which don't produce sounds. These help close when swallowing. And then the voice box. And this is the lower folds of the cartilage. This is the true vocal cords. And this is going to vibrate and produce sounds when air is exhaled. So after it goes to the larynx, it is then going to go into the trachea. But let's just first review. So the first 3 steps, we're first going into the nose through the nasal cavity. It's going to go down. Once it's in the nasal cavity, it's going to then go in through the pharynx. All right. And remember, the pharynx has a passageway for going to connect to the respiratory system or the digestive tract. Once it gets to the larynx, we're going to have a bunch of folds. We're going to have a prominent Adam's apple. We're going to have false and true vocal cords. Okay, so then it's going to travel into the trachea. The trachea is considered the windpipe. This is a very tough but flexible tube. It has about 20 C-shaped cartilage rings that's going to help prevent the trachea from collapsing. It also contains ciliated mucus membranes that are going to filter the air. And also it's going to entrap particles when it gets there where it can be swallowed. The trachea is then branched into bronchial tubes that are going to enter each lung. Those bronchial tubes branch repeatedly, forming bronchioles, and then they're going to end in these sacs called alveoli. The alveoli are macroscopic cavities or little sacs. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are going to diffuse across those walls of the alveoli, and then it's going to be in the lungs. So if you look here, just as a little review, we have the larynx is shown up there. You're seeing the prominent with the Adam's apple and the different folds. The trachea has all these little C-shaped rings that surround it. Then it's going to then go into the bronchi, and you can see here that it then goes further into the bronchioles, and it's going to end in these sacs or the alveoli. And you can see that there are tons of capillaries that are transferring the carbon dioxide and the oxygen. Now, as far as the last place the air is going to travel, it goes to the lungs. These are distinct cone-shaped lobes, very soft and spongy. There is a right and a left lobe. They are encased in a double pleural membrane, and that's going to allow a small amount of fluid to go in between, so it reduces the friction and lubrication and irritation. Just so you know, the right lung is larger than the left. It does have 3 lobes instead of 2 for the left. Now, the diaphragm is a thin sheet of muscle that is going to form the kind of the bottom wall of that thoracic cavity. Air is going to be taking into the lungs through the actions of the diaphragm and the rib muscles. And that together is going to help change the chest size or the chest cavity, which is then going to change the gas pressure in the lungs. This is just showing you the different lungs, and you can see the trachea with the bronchi, bronchioles, and then the alveoli. This is just a review of the airflow or the inhalation or breathing in process. Okay, so when the chest cavity expands, the pressure within the chest and surrounding the lungs falls. That is going to reduce air pressure, and that is going to cause the air to be forced into the lungs from the outside. And that is because it's a higher pressure outside. When the volume of the chest cavity surrounding the lungs is reduced, that causes the internal pressure to become greater than the outside. So that is going to force the gas out. Now, large volume of gas can be exchanged with the bloodstream in a very, very short period of time because of all those alveoli. That is going to totally increase the surface area. And another important thing for you to know is that hemoglobin, that iron-containing protein that's found in blood, binds to oxygen, 4 oxygen molecules. It forms a structure called oxyhemoglobin. That allows human blood to carry 70 times more oxygen than it could otherwise. So the average person is going to extract 4,500 grams of oxygen from the 50,000 liters of air inhaled each day. Without the hemoglobin, that number would probably be about 60. So again, it's very efficient in getting the gas exchange to happen. So there's a lot of different terms on breathing. So when we talk about inhalation, we're going to call it inspiration. This is the process when the ribs move out. It enlarges that thoracic cavity. The diaphragm will go down, again, enlarging that thoracic cavity. and that's going to decrease the pressure within the alveoli. That causes the lungs to expand and the pressure to increase. Now, the expiration is an exhalation, okay? The ribs are going to move in, diaphragm's going to contract, it's going to come up, and that pressure is going to decrease, right? There's some more terms that we're going to talk about, and there's an awesome lab that we could do when we come back to school on all these terms so you can practice them. So again, this is just going to be a lot of terms being thrown at you. Tidal air volume is our normal relaxed breathing, something that we do pretty much all the time. Now, this is the volume of air that is inhaled and exhaled within each breath. It's about 500 milliliters. The expiratory reserve volume is if you take a pause after you're done breathing and then exhale everything possible that you can out. It's almost like you're going to double over. That's going to allow us to expel about 800 to 1,200 more milliliters of air. Inspiratory reserve volume, it's hard to measure because we're not going to inhale forcibly and measure it somehow. But it is pretty much inhaling as much as we can to make our lungs to go to a maximum capacity. This will pull in an additional 2,100 to 3,000 milliliters of air. So the total vital capacity is when you add all three, the tidal air volume, add it to the expiratory reserve volume, plus the inspiratory reserve volume. This is a maximum volume of air that can be inhaled and exhaled during forced breathing. This amount is about 3,400 to 4,700 milliliters of air. Now, our lungs don't totally decrease. So our lungs, alveoli, and air passageway still contain a volume of air, which is roughly about 1,000 to 1,200 milliliters. The total lung capacity includes everything. It's going to contain the vital capacity, which is the tidal air volume, expiratory and inspiratory reserve volumes, and it's going to add in the residual air volume. This is about a quart of air, which is about 5,800 milliliters of air. And then the last set of terms that we need to learn is the respiratory rate and the respiratory minute volume. The respiratory rate is the number of breaths taken per minute. It's roughly between 12 and 18 breaths taken per minute. And the respiratory minute volume is the amount of air moved in per minute times that respiratory rate. When we do come back to school, we'll be doing lots of different labs on this activity, on all of these respiratory terms. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.